Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. 3 months ago, Lorenzo Collins, a 25-year-old Avondale resident who suffered from mental illness, was arrested on suspicion of stealing $800 worth of clothing from a Springdale store. While being evaluated at the University Hospital, Collins escaped. When the police cornered him a few blocks from the hospital, Mr. Collins held off the police while threatening them with a brick. When mace proved unsuccessful, the desperation of the officers can be heard in this radio transmission.
Drop the brick now! Drop it! Drop the brick! Put it down! Drop the brick now!
4211, is everything okay there?
Negative. 45 gets a taser.
The police shot Collins 3 times, and 4 days later he died. Angry over the shooting and frustrated with the lack of response from city officials, demonstrators have increasingly made their presence known at City Hall, carrying foam bricks and cardboard coffins. On May the 7th, City Council voted 8-1 to ask the FBI to investigate, expressing concern that County Prosecutor Joe Dieters has a conflict of interest as a member of the University Board of Trustees. To discuss this situation and its broader significance, I am joined this morning by 2 people. Ken Lawson is a lawyer representing the Collins family and instrumental in pressing the council for action. Pete Ritter is the president of the Cincinnati Fraternal Order of Police. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Newsmakers. Mr. Lawson, at this stage of the process, this shooting took place some time ago now. Where do things stand, and where do you think things need to go in the immediate future here?
Well, I think that where they stand at now is it's in the hands of Joe Dieters, who is looking to determine whether or not it's going to be presented to the grand jury. With respect to what's going to happen in the future, we'll be able to find out more about that once the criminal investigation is over with.
Do you think, in your mind, are you arguing that this particular shooting either violated the law or violated police procedures, or are you arguing that police policy in relationship to mental patients, the mentally ill, the policy is wrong? Which one of those are you arguing?
Maybe a combination of all 3, but the overriding concern and history in Cincinnati with the way that the mentally ill are apprehended and mentally ill patients are confronted shows that I believe we have a problem. And looking through the prior investigations going all the way back to 1989 on up to date, even in those investigations through the OMI reports, they're telling the city that you need to improve or get a policy on how to apprehend people who have mental problems. And this goes all the way back to 1989. And to this date, we still have problems with the police confronting people who have mental illnesses.
So if Joe Dieters came back and said this particular shooting fit the guidelines, that the police who were involved in this one did what they were told to do or supposed to do in this situation, and therefore they're not going to prosecute, but the police at the same time said we need to review our general policy, would that satisfy you?
Yeah, I mean, let's assume that the officer acted pursuant to his training. Then you can't fault the officer. What needs to be looked at again, and what they were told to look at in 1989, was the training on how to apprehend individuals that have mental illnesses. And so if Joe Dieters comes back and says, well, the police officer acted within those guidelines or within those procedures, that's really not been our argument. Our concern has been, since 1989, how are you? You know, to me, if you have 5 or 6 to 9 officers surrounding a mentally disturbed man, and he has a brick, there's got to be a way in 1997 that we can apprehend people without killing them. And you have to think that when at the Lewis Center and other places like that sometimes patients will lose their tempers and are uncontrollable. They may pick up a chair. But we don't read about people at the Lewis Center shooting these patients that they need to get under control. There has to be a better way to do this.
Mr. Ritter, this case has been under review now for some time. Does it surprise you that it's taken this long to get a report back from the city administration, from the prosecutor? Why is it taking this long?
Well, the investigation has to go on, and I imagine it depends on how many witnesses they have to interview, the tapes. I'm sure they went over the tapes, background on how did he get out of the university hospital to begin with. That all takes time, and then once that's done, then you have to put it in a report, and that's going to have to take time. We would all like to see things go a little quicker, but you don't want to rush either because you don't want to leave anything out. That's just the nature of the incident.
So is the time span that we've experienced here, about 3 months, is this normal for this sort of case?
On shooting cases where someone has been killed, that's about normal. And it depends on number of witnesses, officers involved. In this case, there was, I think, a total of 13 officers, 5 from the university and I think 8 from Cincinnati, plus a number of witnesses. I think there was over quite a few witnesses they had to interview, and you have to make sure you do it right. You don't want to miss any. You don't want to miss anything.
One of the things that has been raised here that we were just talking about is the policy that the police are trained under and operate under. From your perspective as the president of the FOP, does that policy need to be reviewed?
Well, there's always ongoing improvements in training, but you can train and train and train, but until you're put under that situation, you don't know what's going to happen. We've made, last year alone in '96, there was over 6,000 runs made where they're labeled mental runs, where someone may be mentally problems. They could range from being very violent or just passive. Out of the 6,000 of those, this is the only one I know we've had, 2 of them that we've had an incident in where force was used. And sure, if you got timing, if you got the time, and in this case, there was the officer asked for a taser, the officer asked for a dog. Those were less than lethal, if the time permits. That's the problem.
But the taser never arrived, or as far as I know, did the dog arrive in time?
The dog was en route, depending on where he's coming from. The tasers are in the supervisor's cars, depending on where they're coming from. And even the tasers don't work all the time.
Right.
My understanding, they only work 40% of the time. I've seen them worked and used them, and they don't work. Mace, most individual that you spray with chemical irritant subdues them. Out of the 400 some cases where we used mace last year, it worked. There's some that didn't. Apparently, in this case, it didn't faze him. I think if we'd have had more time, this could have been resolved without incident. But
why wasn't there?
One way of getting more time is that when you have up to 9 officers surrounding this man was cornered. And like anyone, when they're cornered and their back is to the wall, they will resort to whatever it is. So if 9 officers is around, maybe backing up some. And I think the latest video we saw, I think from Seattle, where the man had a sword and was out there swinging it, the police were not up front on him, giving him the impression that he has to do something. They backed up, surrounded him, and contained him. There are things that we must look at because, like I said, from 1989, when you're talking about almost 9 deaths, and last year with Daryl Price, who was jumping up and down on top of a car, dies in police custody, who has a mental illness, and these are people. And what we're saying is, if you got those officers out there, there's got to be a way.
There was another case back in December on Christmas Eve, a case out in College Hill of a man in Cincinnati. Now, we're not talking about, Seattle was also a sword case, but in Cincinnati, a mentally ill individual who had a sword, ceremonial Civil War type of sword, was also shot. Now, was not killed. What about that case? That didn't cause the sort of uproar that Lorenzo Collins case. That sort of has dropped out. What's the difference?
Let's say the sword is different to me because obviously you can get stabbed with it. When you have on a bulletproof vest, they have them, the helmets and the mask in the cars with them. They have their batons. the person, if they throw the brick, you got a chance to duck. If you back up and still contain, you see the brick coming, you can move. The sword, obviously, is a more deadly weapon. But secondly, only though enough shots were fired to stop the force. The man was not fatally wounded. And when you're using deadly force, or when you're using self-defense, you're only allowed to use that force which is necessary to stop the force that's coming at you. If I'm in a fist fight with you, I can't shoot you with a gun.
Is that, as you understand police policy, is that police policy you can only use appropriate force, the level of force necessary to protect yourself and get your job done, and therefore, in this particular situation, this person should have been, even if there had to be a shooting, could have been shot in the leg or whatever?
That's the mentality from television. Why not shoot the brick out of his hand? And we're assuming also that he's going to throw this brick. You got to be in that officer. The Supreme Court has ruled on the use of deadly force, and they have said that it's the threat of serious physical harm or death. The threat. If you have a gun in your hand, I don't have to wait for you to shoot me before I can use deadly force. In this incident with the sword, probably the reason, I don't know why the subject didn't die. Maybe because where the bullets went in, it didn't kill him. I don't know what the autopsy.
Didn't die.
I don't know what the autopsy would have. What the autopsy report says in the Lorenzo Collins case. And the thing with Lorenzo Collins is the size of the man. If he's in a psychotic state, and Ken says we'll corner him and back off. How do we know that wasn't done? How we don't know that the facts haven't come out? We don't know that they were backing off.
It couldn't have been done at their masoning. If you're close enough to mace somebody, you're not backed off on them. Well, and if you admit that the man was getting maced and it didn't work, you got to be close to spray the mace.
Well, we don't know if the officers maced, then backed off, and they took a step, did step back. That we don't know that yet. And the other thing is you can't control that person's actions. If the officers, let's say they maced and they backed up 20 feet, and that person decides that he wants to die, he's got a brick in his hand, and he determines, well, I'm going to rush one of those officers, and I'm going to go to the point. I'm not going to throw it. I'm just going to stand over that officer and beat him with that brick.
Was he rushing?
And 8 other officers are going to stand there and let that happen. I mean, if you and I and 3 of our other friends are around, and this man right here has a brick in his hand, to me, just from being in the streets, no one's going to say, I'm going to run home and get my gun and shoot him. We will take his brick.
Will cause serious injury.
I'm not saying that it won't.
Talk to police officer Dave Russell, who was seriously injured and now has been retired.
He wasn't hit
with
the brick. He was not hit with the brick.
Who was beaten, was murdered with a rock, or the individual.
All I'm saying is
Finley,
this: when you got 9 officers around, there's got to be a better way than shooting a man to death.
Let me ask this question. You were pressing counsel, and counsel agreed to call in the FBI.
That's what we wanted, was an investigation on not just Lorenzo Collins, but going all the way back into why we keep having so many deaths with people that have mental illnesses.
And you wanted the FBI to do that study?
The Justice Department to do that independently. It wasn't just for a criminal investigation into this particular case.
And is that what counsel asked the FBI to do?
What counsel asked the FBI to do was to have, or asked the U.S. Attorney to look at the case to see if criminal charges should be brought against this officer. What we were asking for is an independent investigation through the Justice Department to look at all the shootings that's happened and the police brutality and things like what Sergeant Sess admits to have done, which is plant drugs.
Yeah, and that gets us into a whole nother set of problems. Let's try to keep focused.
But it still gets us back to the original request of the Justice Department.
So your argument would be that the Cincinnati Police Department, on a systematic or policy level, has got some basic flaws. What are we charging here? Are they out of control? Are they? No, what's the charge?
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that, and again, understand this: the African American community needs the police more than anybody else, and we support the police. But what we need to look at is whether or not we're doing enough interracial policing in the area. See, Lorenzo Collins was picked up in a state of mental illness 30 days before this, where he was acting in the same manner as he was this day. But there were African American police officers, along with others present, who were able to take him to university. Okay? And what I'm saying is, I think that there are certain things that we need to look at to improve our relationship.
So you're saying that there's a real racial base to this problem.
No, don't put words in my mouth.
Well,
what
then,
I'm saying, what
okay,
I'm saying
I'm just
is
trying
this.
to summarize.
I'm saying that we have to be concerned about our police department and the problems that exist in the African American community, okay? The history says that there's a problem because in the last since '89, the majority, all the men killed have been black. Now, I don't know if we need to get to a certain number of 20 black males killed in a certain amount of time before we say that maybe we need to start looking at race. Is there a specific number? I'm not saying it, the history's saying it.
So I guess the question is this ultimately a question about treatment of mentally ill patients, individuals, or is it ultimately a question about race relations?
It's both. I mean,
It's both.
It's
Okay.
both. What I'm saying is that there's certain things that we should look at as a community together to make our force better. And there's nothing wrong. People say, well, if you come out and criticize our police force, you're anti-police. If you have children, you criticize your child, you will punish your child, and you tell them, I'm punishing you because I love you, and I want you to be better. And this is the same thing we're saying. We want a good police department. So don't make it seem like we're anti-police. We are pro-police, and we need them in our neighborhoods, but we want an understanding and a better understanding so we have a better department.
How do you react to that?
I
we got
think
about a minute left.
a lot of time this is race. If the College Hill incident would have been white officers and the victim would have been black, I think you'd have heard more. And I think some people in the community have their own agenda.
I spoke out about that.
One thing I want to point out that there are 45 neighborhoods in the city of Cincinnati, and they have council groups and council presidents. And I haven't seen any of those down at City Hall condemning the police officers, because those people deal with the police officers on a regular basis, and they know that the officers on a whole are doing the best job they can do. And the other thing I'd like to know about Lorenzo Collins, if he had a past mental state, where were the professionals? Where were his family? Where were they during all this period of time?
Well, you don't blame the man's family for what happened, and I think that's wrong. And if you had, let me finish. You had your chance. Let me finish. What I'm saying is this: you all get angry whenever we look like we can't criticize our police department, and the city pays the taxes, and the citizens pay the taxes. There were leaders from those community councils down at City Hall. So let me finish. I didn't see you down there to say that they were not down there. There were leaders from those community councils down there also. All we're saying is we want to work with the police department to get a better police department, and don't get angry because we look at it and try to give constructive criticism. We are not anti-police. Then let's communicate and get it done.
We're out of time here, but let me ask one question. Would it be to the good if the people that you gathered to go down to City Council to try to work with the department was a broader base of people?
It is. You got the Baptist ministers, members from the NAACP, members from the Urban League, members from all over this city down there. They make it seem like it's just one sect going down there. The Baptist ministers and all those people have been involved.
But realistically, I think when people see what's on TV.
You see the Baptist ministers, you see Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth from the Baptist ministers.
Let's be honest about this. What you see is African American.
How can you tell me to be honest about it when I'm telling you who's involved?
But what's seen is the African American, a group of African American leaders confronting this issue. Isn't that true? Wouldn't it be good if you could gather in?
I don't know if have you been down there to see all the people that come from the various parts, even whites. I don't understand what you're just saying. It's just the leaders that go down there. It's the people that go down there.
So it is a mixed group?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're out of time. Sorry about that, but thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone supports higher school standards, right? Well, not always. Join me after the break and see why some educators from the most successful schools think the latest proposals for raising educational standards are a bad idea. Welcome back. Last week, the State Board of Education approved a plan that would significantly increase the requirements students would have to meet for graduation. This plan has been opposed by a number of local education leaders, including the superintendents of some of the area's premier school districts. To explain why this latest proposal for improving public schools is controversial, I am joined this morning by Michele Humel, the superintendent of Madeira Schools, and Roy Hill, the superintendent of Local City Schools. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Mikey, explain what is the proposal? What is the state school board proposing be implemented?
Well, the changes that are occurring are things, just as you mentioned, that are going to deal with requirements for graduation, some competencies in foreign language for all children, in the arts. Obviously, we've always had standards in English language arts, math, science, social studies. The core is still there, still important to everybody, but it's actually more things in process that are changing also. There's a requirement for a continuous improvement plan, which is important for all districts to plan. There are some things in professional growth and special education, gifted education, really covers a very broad scope of everything that happens in the schools. I'd say just about every area within our schools is going to be touched upon by the new standards.
Roy, that all sounds good to me as a consumer out there. Why is that a problem?
It sounds good. The process sounds great. The problem is the potential impact and the potential cost. Everyone is very conscious right now of the cost of education, especially public education. We're concerned that these new standards in their current form are very expansive in process and cost to school districts. We've had standards for, time immemorial, but these standards are much more expansive, as Dr. Humel said, and they're very process and very document rich.
Well, give me an example. Give me a concrete example of how this might affect the Madeira schools in an area that you can show how it would impact the budget. Just one, give me one example.
Okay, one example that's going to affect most of the schools is there's now a requirement for 2 years of foreign language for graduation. Most school districts allow students to have an opportunity to choose whether they're going to take foreign language. So if this becomes a requirement, then everybody will need to hire more foreign language teachers. Now again, I say most high schools. Madeira High School does have a graduation requirement already for 2 years of foreign language. But you can see immediately that as you add personnel, and personnel is the most expensive part of our budget. Right now, about 80% of most school districts' budget are for people. And so we watch that area very, very closely for our taxpayers and for our programs.
If, Roy, if the requirements added some additional requirements in foreign language, as was just outlined, does that mean, though, that they're really additions, or does it mean you are able to cut back someplace else? Because, okay, you'd have to hire additional foreign language teachers, but maybe you would no longer need as many something else.
That's our problem. All the something else's have been expanded as well in these standards. It's very encompassing, as we said. Many areas are being added. We've had the core basic areas in the standards for some time, the math, the science, and those areas that we have to test for with the state level proficiency tests. But now the second layer of these other subject areas being added, and not to mention special education, enhancements, gifted education, the whole gamut.
In theory, when's this proposal supposed to go into effect?
The plan is to put it into effect at the 98-99 school year. So we'd have 1 school year to finish the development of the process and then start phasing in the new standards.
But we're missing a point here. We talk about that the standards, and I think that every superintendent in Ohio, every board member, every teacher, every parent, every community member supports high expectations, values high standards, but in fact, we're losing some local control here. And let me give you an analogy. Imagine that your employer says to you, we have a standard here that you come to work every regularly scheduled day and you be here on time. That's a great standard. Not only should your employer do, but every employer in Ohio should do it. And in fact, if you look at successful businesses, they would have that particular standard. But now your employer says to you, and here's the car that you need to drive to work, and here are the people with whom you must carpool. Well, now you're saying, don't I have some control over that? As long as I meet the standard, as long as I'm there every day and accomplish what you've told me, how come I have to do it this way, when in fact, if I took public transportation, I might be more cost effective, or in fact, it might be better for my community if my neighbors and I carpooled, even though they didn't work at my employment place, they worked on the way, and I could do that. Well, they're doing that to us in the standards. They tell us that we all have to have a continuous improvement plan. Everybody believes that people should plan, but then it tells me who I should have on my committee.
Right. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, and obviously we have to get to the point where we can mesh this with the great big funding issues that are still out there in the next year. Thank you for being with us, and we'll try to have you back in the future. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week for 12 Newsmakers.